What is going on, guys? Flam back another video, and today I wanted to break down the brand new dual wield pistols. So let's go ahead and just jump right into the breakdown of this weapon. First of all, let's talk about how this weapon works, because in most games when you have dual wield pistols, you can fire with the right trigger and the left trigger. However, with this game, it is actually you can only fire with the right trigger, and it automatically fires both weapons back to back. When I first used this weapon and I figured out you couldn't actually fire them both with different triggers, I was kind of confused because every other game has that. It's kind of confusing as to why they didn't do that. But then I realized how smart it was that they actually decided not to do that. Because with the left trigger, it makes it so that you can zoom in just like with every other weapon, and that makes a ton of sense because this is a battle royale game. This is a giant map, and if you don't have a weapon that can actually zoom in, it's going to decrease its effectiveness so much, especially since this game is third-person mode. So to me, that just really shows how well Epic Games thinks through the process of putting a new type of weapon into the game, and how well they actually test the weapons before they decide to put them in. But anyways, dual wield pistols. They come in two variants, one being epic or purple, and one being a legendary or gold. So the purple variant does 41 body shot damage and 82 critical damage, and the gold variant does 43 body shot damage and 86 critical damage. Now those numbers are for individual bullets, and of course this being a dual wield pistol means you fire two weapons almost simultaneously. There's about 0.05 of a second in between the time you fire the first bullet and the second bullet, so they fire very quickly back to back. So what does that mean? Well, once you pull the trigger, you have the potential to be doing like 86 body shot damage with the gold variant and up to 172 critical damage when you fire both and you are able to hit both shots to the head of an opponent. Now, if you are able to accomplish this, it does register them both as separate bullets, of course, as we talked about. So if you do hit both headshots back to back, it will simply show up as 286s. Now, the next thing we want to look at is, of course, time to kill. So the time to kill for the dual wield pistols versus somebody who is 100 health in Fortnite is 51/100 of a second. Now, if we compare that to something like a Scar, the Scar has a time to kill of 36/100 of a second. So as you can tell, it is quite a bit slower than a Scar. If you were wondering, something like a white, green, or blue AR, not any of the Scar variants, they have a time to kill of 55/100 of a second. So this is actually faster than a normal white AR, a green AR, or a blue AR. When it comes to somebody who is 200 health in Fortnite, the time to kill on the dual wield pistols is 1 second even. When it comes to the Scar, it is 91/100 of a second, and when it comes to the normal ARs, the white, green, and blue, they are 1.1 seconds. Now, if we were to factor in the headshot time to kill on this weapon, it would far and wide exceed all other weapons. It has a headshot time to kill of 0.05 of a second, which is basically unbeatable by anything but a shotgun. But the reason I don't like to take that into consideration is because with Bloom in the game, it's so hard to really hit headshots in this game consistently, because a lot of it honestly just comes down to the RNG of Bloom in this game. Now, some of you may be asking, what is Bloom? I cover this so often in so many videos, but I'm going to cover it again because some of you guys may not know. Some people do call this bullet spread. It's literally the same thing. People in my comments get so triggered that I call it Bloom. Bloom literally means the same thing as bullet spread. It means to spread. When a flower blooms, it spreads. It's the same thing. So what is Bloom? Well, as you can see here, we are zoomed into the center of the screen, and right in the middle, that is the reticle. And then the 4 lines around the outside of the reticle, that is the potential area in which a bullet can potentially go. So the bullet does not actually go directly where the reticle is. That's where it's most likely to go. However, anywhere inside of those 4 lines is where a bullet has the possibility to go. So the wider those 4 lines are, the less likely your bullet is going to go where you want it to go, and the closer and the more confined those 4 lines are, that means your bullet is probably going to be a lot more accurate. So what's the Bloom like on the dual wield pistols? Well, right here is me zoomed in on the Bloom on the dual wield pistols, and for comparison, here is a gold Scar. As you can see, the dual wield pistols are a little bit more spread out than the gold Scar, but that isn't really an indication of how much Bloom there actually is on the dual wield pistols. Because when you start firing the dual wield pistols back to back, they go extensively further apart. The lines around the reticle spread out emphatically compared to something like the Scar, whereas if you just fire it consistently, it doesn't really spread out a ton. But with the dual-wield pistols, you can definitely tell how much more inaccurate it becomes as you fire it more and more continuously. So the reason I bring up bloom so much in a lot of my videos is because it's a really good indicator of how much range a weapon has. If a weapon has a lot of bloom and the lines around the reticle spread out a lot, that means you're probably not going to want to use it at a very long range. And that is definitely true with the dual-wield pistols. This is more of an up-close to medium range weapon. You can definitely be pretty effective at medium range, but pushing those longer distances, you're really not going to see a lot of effectiveness with this weapon. Now the next thing I wanted to address when talking about this weapon is the recoil pattern. There are two pistols and one fires later than the other, which means one has to go in a different area than the other due to recoil. Recoil is the pattern in which the weapon goes after it is fired. All weapons typically go straight up, and some of them curve a little bit to the left or to the right. So as you can see right here when I'm firing at the wall, this weapon does go straight up. Now why am I telling you this information? Well, I think this is some of the most critical information you should know about these dual-wield pistols. You should know that there is a considerable amount of recoil that is going to cause your second bullet to go a little bit higher than the first one. Now what can you do with that information? Well, there's two options in my mind. Number one is you can aim lower on a person so that you are less likely to miss the second bullet. If you aim for like around the torso, the belly button area, then there's a lot less of a chance that your bullet is going to fly over someone's head. The second thing you can do, which is the thing I would suggest you do if you're someone who really wants to master the dual-wield pistols, is try and control that recoil. Right after you pull that trigger and the first bullet comes out of the first pistol, you need to be tugging down on your thumbstick or your mouse or on the screen if you're on mobile, and you need to try and get the recoil back down so you can be in the exact same spot that you fired the first bullet. This is going to take a ton of practice, and it has to be done immediately because, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there's only 0.05 of a second in between the time that the first pistol fires and the second pistol fires. But it definitely isn't impossible, because as you watch from the clips when I was actually trying to control the recoil, I was actually able to pretty effectively get them very close to being in the exact same spot. What I was doing is right as I pulled the trigger, I simply pushed down on my thumbstick, and I was able to get it relatively close and sometimes even right on top of each other. Of course, even if you do master this, as we talked about earlier, bloom is a thing in this game, which means even if you master this 100% effectively, your bullets still could go in random directions. With bloom in the game, it's not 100% guaranteed that it's going to go directly where your reticle is, so don't expect to be 100% perfect with this weapon, even if you do really master it. Now the final thing that I wanted to talk about for this video and for the dual-wield pistols is how effective are they at taking out opponents' builds. This weapon is super effective at taking out other opponents' builds, but how effective is it compared to other weapons in the game? Well, let's go ahead and break it down. Now, one thing I will mention real quick before we get into this comparison is that the damage number on the epic variant does 42 per bullet, and the damage for the legendary variant dual-wield pistols is 44, which is not the same as the damage it does to players, which is what it should be. I think it's kind of a glitch at the moment that it does 1 more damage per shot, which isn't a big difference, but it is a difference and something that I don't think is intended, because with the recent update, they actually made it so that every single weapon does the same damage to builds as it does to opponents. So right here are the gold dual-wield pistols taking on a piece of metal, and when a piece of metal is fully built, it has 400 damage that it can take. So it takes 2 seconds and 15 frames in order for the gold dual-wield pistols to take it out. As you can see, that is 15 frames out of a possible 60, which means that is 0.25 of a second. As a comparison, here is a gold scar which takes 2 seconds and 7 frames, and right here is a purple SMG which takes 1 second and 55 frames. Now at the moment, all SMGs in the game are doing 2 damage per shot less than they're supposed to. With the recent update, all SMGs got a 2+ damage buff, and for some reason they forgot to do that to the builds as well. So a purple SMG would actually be able to take out this piece of material faster if it did the right numbers, but currently it is only doing 18 damage per shot, so it is a little bit slower, but of course compared to the other ones, it is still faster than both of those. Now taking out a piece of metal that is 400 damage is cool and all, but typically you're not going to be taking that out. It's good information to know, but it's not the thing that we are most looking for. The thing that we most want to know is how long does it take to take out a piece of wood. More specifically, how long does it take to take out a piece of wood once you initially place it down. Because typically when you're trying to shoot at somebody, they'll be placing a bunch of wood, brick, or metal, and you want to mow through it as fast as humanly possible. Now the information we need to know in order to understand this is how much damage does a piece of wood have when it is initially placed down. I talked about this in one of my very first Fortnite videos where I talked about how wood is actually stronger than metal, is because when you first place down wood, it takes damage of 100. Brick takes damage of 90, and metal takes damage of 80. The next piece of information that we need to know, and this is also very critical that you remember, is how much damage do these increase by as they are continuously growing stronger and stronger. For wood, every half second it gains an additional 13 HP, so for every full second it gains an additional 26 HP. When it comes to both brick and metal, those gain 9 HP every half second, which is 18 HP every full second. So right here is how long it takes dual wield pistols to do over 100 damage. It takes 37 frames. Remember, that is 37 out of a possible 60 frames, so over half of a second. Right here is how long it takes a scar to do the same thing, go over 100 damage, which it takes exactly 30 frames, which is half of a second. And the same goes for the purple SMG, it takes 30 frames, which is half of a second. So as we mentioned earlier, once you hit that half second point, a piece of wood, brick, or metal is going to grow in strength if it was just barely placed down. So even though the Scar and the purple SMG were able to get there faster to over 100 HP, by the time they got there, the wood would have grown in strength, and it would have required 113 damage in order to destroy it. However, both the purple SMG and the gold Scar only did 108 damage. When it came to the dual wield pistols, however, they would have done 176 damage. In this clip, I did actually only do 132 damage, which is pretty funny because what I noticed when I was going over this is I actually had a ghost bullet on my dual wield pistols. As you can see right here, when I fire my pistols, it's supposed to go from 18 down to 16 because of course it is firing 2 bullets, and it does for a very split second, but then it goes back up to 17 because it realizes for some reason that it didn't fire one of the bullets. It just didn't register, so it was like, okay, well, here's your bullet back. I guess it didn't fire even though it showed the animation. A couple of times when I was using this weapon in game, I did feel like I was having some ghost bullets like more than normal. I was missing a lot more shots that I feel like I should have been hitting, and I wonder how pronounced this problem actually is. I wonder if Epic Games needs to really look at this, if the ghost bullets is a really big problem, because it could be something that's really affecting this weapon at the moment, and I think Epic Games should really look into that. So real quick, let me cut in here because I noticed while I was editing this video that a lot of times when I was using these dual wield pistols, I would fire and it would return one bullet to the magazine because it just wouldn't register that bullet. So there's definitely some problems with the dual wield pistols at the moment. Hopefully Epic Games can iron out the bugs, because that is a pretty big deal in order for you to have one bullet that just entirely does not register. But anyways, back to what we were talking about with the dual wield pistols when taking out materials, is that with the dual wield pistols, even though it is taking a little bit longer in order to get that second fire off, it is doing a ton more damage. Like I said, 176 damage compared to something like a Scar or an SMG that is only doing 108. So technically it would take 42 frames for a Scar or an SMG to be able to take out a newly placed piece of wood, because like I said, by the time it gets to that 30 frames mark, that half of a second, the wood has increased in strength, meaning it is actually not able to be destroyed by only 108 damage. So currently the dual wield pistols are one of the best weapons in the game at taking out wood. The Scar and the SMG would be a lot better at taking out brick or metal, and the purple SMG would be one of the best weapons in the game if it did actually do its proper damage, because it would do it faster than both the Scar and the dual wield pistols. But at the moment, the dual wield pistols are one of the best, besides the minigun or the LMG. Holy crap, this is a long video. I'm sorry it took so long. Like I said, there was a lot of bugs and a lot of complications, and there was really a lot to explain on this weapon. It's dual wield pistols. It's something we haven't really seen from this game, so I did really feel like I needed to break it down a lot more for you guys and give you guys a really in-depth look at how you can maximize the potential of this weapon. The two biggest things that I think you should take away from this video are, number one, you should try and control the recoil so you can potentially hit both of the bullets when you fire this weapon. And number two, you should know that this weapon is very effective at taking out opponents' builds. The dual wield pistols are the same as every other weapon in the game, and they do not suffer from damage fall off when you are shooting out builds. So that means at very extended ranges, this weapon is still extremely powerful at taking out somebody else's build. So if you're trying to do something where you need to take out someone else's build, you're shooting a rocket and you want to shoot out their builds real quick, this is a really good combo. One final thing I will sneak in at the very end here that does have to do with the dual wield pistols, because there's just so much information about this weapon and needs to be broken down, is that this weapon does take a lot of time to draw it. The draw speed on this weapon is the exact same as something like a pump, so that is something that you should definitely keep in mind when using this weapon. Dual wielding this weapon using two of this item and trying to switch back and forth between them, not effective whatsoever. Don't bother doing it. It is not effective. But you should also know that the draw speed is so slow, because if you're trying to do something like combo it, let's say you're trying to do a shotgun and then use this weapon, it's not going to work. It's not going to be effective. You want to use this weapon first, because by the time you are able to pull it out in order to shoot somebody, it will basically be too late and they'll be killing you by the time you do it. So I'd highly suggest, if you're going to use this weapon, make sure you use it as a first punch type of weapon. And then if you want to switch to something like a tac shotgun or an SMG or a heavy shotgun, something like that, then that would be the better option. But start off with this weapon and then switch to a different weapon. Of course, assuming you don't want to just use this weapon entirely by itself, because it can definitely hold its own as just a single weapon that you use by itself. Anyways, that is all that I have for this video. Hopefully it was informative. Thank you so very much for watching. I'm sorry it was so long, but there's a ton of information to break down, and I felt like I did have to break it all down. I'm planning on doing an SMG part 2 comparison, because there were some awesome changes that make the SMGs almost better than shotguns, not gonna lie. But I will catch you guys in my next video.